We all know in microeconomics, price is the most paramount signaling mechanism in the allocation of goods and services, and equilibrium price in particular is reflective of the marginal value consumers assign to a good and the marginal costs incurred by firms in its production. We also know that individuals are rational and will weigh up the costs and benefits of a decision as they are perceived internally, rarely considering the imposition of their actions on others. Occasionally, however, price alone does not capture all the benefits and costs related to a good or service, particularly if these costs infringe on a public good that has not been assigned a market value, such as air, water, and broader aspects of the environment. An externality in its most overarching sense is a spillover effect associated with the production or consumption of a given good or service that extends to third parties, inclusive and exclusive of the market. This effect is external to the concerns of the market, usually unplanned or unintended, and is typically not addressed through any market-based solutions. The term externality refers to the total cost of a good or service, the sum of both the private and the external cost, whereby the private cost is that to the individual decision maker and the external cost is that to society, including those who have no control over the individual deciding to consume a good or service. If this external effect or consequence generates one or multiple costs to an individual or society, it is deemed a negative externality. If it generates a benefit, it is deemed a positive externality. Such costs do not need to be monetary, but could be costs or intrusions on an individual or society's well-being, including the valuations placed on factors such as public health, moral or ethical concerns, and what constitutes a satisfactory quality of life. When looking at a positive social externality such as education, the social benefits or the aggregate benefit for society exceeds the private benefit that impacts the individual. Having a higher educated population leads to a greater proportion of people having more disposable income, enhanced social mobility, increased tax revenue, and a decrease in preventable diseases and certain types of crimes. In a free market, positive externalities are often underproduced due to the private decision maker not being fully aware of the total potential benefit of their actions. In these instances, governments seek to increase the level of positive externalities in a society by providing incentives that make the decision more attractive to the private decision maker. But how can we represent this graphically? To assist us in explaining this concept, let us assume in the early stages of the model, marginal private cost and social cost are equal, while marginal benefit is inversely related to the quantity of education supplied, whereby the more education is produced, the less marginal benefit is yielded to society. In this model, demand is synonymous with marginal benefit, whereby the marginal benefit represented is the level of benefit that party demands for themselves. These assumptions will be consistent for all graphs presented in this video. Similar to what we've done in class, Q is represented on the x-axis while P is on the y-axis, and E1 represents the equilibrium price and quantity for education, solely based on the marginal costs and benefits of private decision makers. Response to the positive externalities associated with education being underproduced, the government attempts to place a monetary value on the positive externalities associated with education by providing calculated funding to universities, student support payments, and the Ext loan scheme. The purpose of all these measures is to entice more people into education, which in turn raises the quantity supplied, quantity demanded, and equilibrium price in the market for education, as private decision makers now factor in both the social and private benefit into their decisions. The demand curve shifts to the right now that it comprises of both the private and social benefit. Society and the individual both demand a greater level of education and are willing to pay more to achieve it. It is true of education and also more broadly of other positive externalities that government intervention attempts to see marginal social benefit incorporated into decision making so that this benefit is realized for the betterment of everyone, not just those involved in the transaction. While the space between the marginal private benefit and the marginal social benefit represents the increased value to society, if this is not realized for any reason, then this area represents a deadweight loss where the market has failed to act efficiently. Another example of a positive externality occurs in shopping centers, but more specifically when customers come to these centers to buy predominantly from the more well-known shops, such as Myer, Coles, and David Jones. These larger anchor stores generate the majority of sales and demand for the center, as well as generate substantial foot traffic that happens to pass smaller stores in the area. As a result of being positioned within the vicinity of these anchor stores, smaller outlets benefit from the additional foot traffic generated by the larger stores, which otherwise would not occur. These smaller outlets are economic free riders because they benefit from the favorable interactive effects of these anchor stores without these stores receiving any compensation or subsidy from the spillover effect that is customer traffic. With the external benefit added, the demand curve, also representing marginal benefit, shifts to the right, intersecting with the supply curve further along, increasing both output, the revenue generated by the shopping center as a whole, and quantity. The positive externality is a greater equilibrium price being established as smaller outlets have gained more revenue for themselves and the shopping center as a whole than otherwise would have occurred without these anchor outlets. There are two main characteristics of negative externalities: external costs incurred by a third party due to production, which are supply-side externalities, and external costs caused by consumption, which are demand-side externalities. Examples of supply-side externalities include water pollution due to food production in agriculture and food processing in plants, as well as air pollution and climate change due to electricity and power generation using fossil fuels. Examples of demand-side externalities include biodiversity loss and fisheries collapse due to overfishing and ozone depletion due to the use of refrigerants. We will now illustrate how the use of refrigerants leads to demand-side negative externalities, which are ozone depletion, particularly before the 1990s. The use of fridges and air conditioners satisfies the consumer's demand for comfort and convenience. However, scientific research has shown that refrigerants in these appliances contain chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, that leak into the atmosphere during the process of installation, operation, and maintenance, and react with the ozone layer in the stratosphere, thus resulting in ozone depletion. Theoretically, producing and selling refrigerators should only include costs incurred by the producer and the supplier, such as production costs, transportation costs, and slotting fees, which are all passed on to consumers in the final price of the good. Consequently, purchasing and using the refrigerators should also include costs incurred by the consumer. Nevertheless, externalities occur when a third party, such as the environment and others that are not involved in the transaction, have to bear the cost of ozone depletion due to the leakage of CFCs into the atmosphere. The presence of these chemicals disturbs the natural composition of gases in the atmosphere and in turn causes an increased risk of skin cancer for humans and disrupts the biochemical processes of other living organisms in this environment. Both marginal social costs and marginal private costs increase as consumption of CFC-containing products increases, while marginal social benefit and marginal private benefit decrease due to law of diminishing marginal utility and the detrimental environmental consequences detailed above. Negative externalities to the society occur when the marginal social cost, E1, is larger than the marginal social benefit, E2. So when E1 exceeds E2, the society pays more than the conventional costs incurred from consumption. At this point in the graph, E1 represents the costs of both environmental and monetary associated.